So the first video that we had talked about God delivering the people from Egypt. He brought them out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and we had them get through the Red Sea. Now, on their way into the wilderness of Zin, the people had to learn some lessons. They had to learn who God was. Again, they had spent 400 years in Egypt. They didn't really even know how to live as a people of God. They didn't even really understand who their God was. So this was, in essence, their retreat, their outreach, their time alone with God to learn who He was, who He is, how He would care for them, and for them to learn how to become a people of God. After they crossed the Red Sea, you would think everything would be great and they would be full of faith. Oh no, no. They got thirsty. They started complaining. God said, strike the rock. Moses struck the rock. Water came out. They got hungry. They began complaining. So God said, okay, every morning I will have bread on the ground for them to eat, and every evening they will have meat to eat. And it started. Every morning they had manna. Manna means, what is it? That's what they called it. What is it? So they had enough manna. They would collect that in the morning, and in the evening, grouse or quail would come in, and they would have those to be able to eat. And that went on for 40 years. God provided every day bread for them and meat for them every day. And still, they weren't completely 100% happy. They had complaints. There were thousands and thousands. Sometimes the number is as big as a couple of million people. And they would come complaining to Moses. And he was in the wilderness. And his father-in-law, Jethro, came and saw this. And he said, Moses, this is not good. They have to wait all day to talk to you. And that's then when Jethro said, why don't you set apart 70 elders, and they can deal with the smaller things, and then only the big things will come to you. So then the authority was passed on, and it didn't all rest on Moses. Finally, they came to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai was where God came to earth, and they were able to sense and feel and hear God in all of His majesty. It said God descended upon Mount Sinai, and there were thunder and lightning and fire and earthquakes and smoke, and it was just crazy, and the people were terrified. And Moses said, okay, set aside 3 days, purify yourself. And Moses went up to the mountain, and he heard from God. Then God invited the 70 elders to come up with Moses and to eat with God. They were able to eat and be in the presence of God. And then Moses stayed, and the rest went down. And for 40 days, Moses was on the mountain, talking with God. It says face to face, as friend to friend. And during that time, God wrote the 10 laws on tablets of stone. Some of us think of Charlton Heston with the big tablets of stone, and he came carrying them down. I heard a friend of ours, a dear friend of ours, Dr. Colonel David Hansen, he said actually they're probably little cylinders like this. But it looks much more impressive to have them carrying these big stones down. So we'll go with that. And Colonel Hansen, you'll have to forgive me. It's just a funner picture. But he got the 10 Commandments. The first 4 were their relationship to God, how they were to live in reverence and worship with God. And the other 6 commandments were how they were to live towards each other as a people of God. But during the 40 days up on the mountain, Moses' brother Aaron was scared, and the people were scared. Remember, there's thunder, and there's lightning, and there's fire, and there's earthquakes, and all this is going on. And they don't know where Moses is, and they don't know what's happened. And they go to Aaron, they say, give us something to worship. And he said, okay, give me all your jewelry. And he melted it down, and poured it into a mold, and out came a calf. And again, I often thought of it as this big calf that they could worship. And again, thanks to my dear friend, Dr. Colonel David Hansen, he said probably it was a calf only about this size. And they all worshiped it. And Aaron said, here is your God who took you out of Egypt. And so they're worshiping this calf. And Moses is coming down off the mountain, having had this great time with God. And his assistant, Joshua, says, oh, there's a sound of war in the camp. It's like, no, this is a sound of rejoicing. And he goes and he sees them dancing around this calf. And Moses is filled with anger, righteous anger. And he smashes the tablets on the ground. And he takes the calf and he grinds it up. And he pours it in the water and he makes the people drink what they had offered. He says, Then he has to go back up on the mountain for another 40 days. And God meets with him again and writes it again. And those commandments became the basis not only for the Jewish people, but also for any nation that has a solid biblical foundation. How we are to relate to God and how we are to relate to each other. And then further on, after that, then God expounds on those laws because people are always going to look for loopholes. And so he expounds on it and elaborates further on how they were supposed to particularly walk out the laws in a practical day-to-day fashion. Because they had to learn how to be a people of God. This was their time. This is their retreat time with God. They were never meant to spend 40 years in the wilderness. It was supposed to be more like 4 months. But I'm not going to steal from the book of Numbers because that's that story. But they were to learn how to be a people of God. They were to learn to treat God with respect. He wasn't a God that they could form out of gold or stone or wood. He was a God who was bigger than they could imagine, who was stronger than they could imagine. Any God that is small enough for us to understand is not big enough for us to worship. And that's what the Israelites were to learn at this time. Mount Sinai was their kindergarten, was their learning the basics. And after they received the law, then God told them how to build a place of worship for him. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next segment.